Good morning. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom's hearing will come to order. I'm USCIRF Chair Vicki Hartzler, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this morning's hearing. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, is an independent, bipartisan U.S. legislative branch agency created by the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act, or IRFA. The Commission uses international standards to monitor religious freedom abroad and makes policy recommendations to the U.S. government. Today, USCIRF exercises its statutory authority under IRFA to convene this hearing. We're glad to welcome recorded remarks from the co-chairs of the Senate Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, U.S. Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma and U.S. Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada. Their leadership is a vital part of the U.S. Congress's effort to address this urgent issue. We're pleased to hear from Senator Lankford, followed by Senator Rosen.
I'm United States Senator James Lankford from the great state of Oklahoma. For all of you working on this hearing today to combat anti-Semitism, thank you. It's important that we keep the conversation going, and it seems sometimes for all of us that talk about it so much, we talk about this all the time, and you want to grow weary of actually bringing this issue up, but don't stop. There's a generation that still has no idea that the Holocaust ever occurred, and there's a whole generation of social media keyboard warriors that are out there trying to tell people that the Holocaust never happened. We have got to continue to be able to speak the truth and to be able to challenge the anti-Semitic rhetoric that continues to rise on the left and on the right. For Jackie Rosen and I, my partner in the task force on combating anti-Semitism in the Senate, when she and I founded it, we both sensed a responsibility to speak to the right and to the left, to our own parties, and to be able to challenge anti-Semitism wherever we may see it. We've done international letters, we've done national postings, we've done conversations with people, we've tried to be able to engage in more Holocaust education to be able to push that. The things that we can do to be able to encourage, because we never want people to be afraid to speak out for the rights of others. When we stop speaking out against anti-Semitism, those folks that rage online and that speak out with flippant statements to their neighbors and their family feel permission to be able to say even more. And people that want to speak out need to see leaders and others that are actually speaking out ahead of them so that they'll feel safe to be able to also speak out against this horrible rhetoric that rages out there in our culture. So thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for giving boldness to others that are watching you to know what is the right thing to be able to do and to be able to speak out on. So bless you in the conversation today.
Hi, I'm Jackie Rosen, and I'm honored to represent Nevada in the United States Senate. I want to thank the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, your chair, Vicki Hartzler, thank you, Vice Chair Asif Mahmood, thank you, and everyone facilitating today's important hearing, thank you. While anti-Semitism has been on the rise for years, it has skyrocketed globally since the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th. We've seen anti-Semitic incidences surge around the world just this year. A deadly attack on a Hanukkah celebration in Australia, violence and intimidation of Jewish communities all across Europe, and gunfire into a synagogue in Canada just days ago. And while some countries have made pointed efforts and advanced policy to aggressively combat anti-Semitism, there is still so much work to be done. We can and we must do everything we can to fight back against anti-Semitism and all acts of hate whenever we see it, both domestically and abroad, on the left, on the right, and in the center. As a former synagogue president, and only one of 2 Jewish women currently serving in the United States Senate, I've made it a priority to work across party lines at the federal level to combat anti-Semitism. It's why I partnered with Senator James Lankford to create the Senate Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, and have introduced several pieces of bipartisan legislation to counter anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial across the U.S. and the world. One of our achievements was to usher through legislation that elevated the State Department Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism to the rank of ambassador. This important effort signaled to the world the seriousness with the U.S. Congress and the State Department view anti-Jewish hate around the globe. I will continue to work diligently with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in the Senate to advance measures that reject and end the hateful bigotry of anti-Semitism worldwide. Please know that you have a partner in the Senate and partners across the Senate fighting to combat anti-Semitism and defend the rights of Jewish people right here at home and around the world. Together, we can create a community that is more tolerant and welcoming for future generations. Thank you again for hosting this important hearing today.
I just was thanking the senators for sending those amazing remarks, very powerful, and we very much appreciate their leadership on Capitol Hill and in Congress. And there are many champions we know in Congress fighting for this, and we're thankful that they are speaking out and participated in our hearing today. But there's still a lot of issues facing us around the world, and I wanted to share and start my remarks with something that's just happened that broke all of our hearts, and it's the story about Matilda, who was age 10, who on Sunday, December 14th, 2025, she was at the beach celebrating Hanukkah with her family. And they were there with other members of the Jewish community of Sydney, Australia for Hanukkah by the Sea, which promised to be an evening of fun and games and delicious food. As revelers gathered at the Bondi Beach, Matilda took in the proceedings. She wore a green and white dress and played with her gum as the wind blew through her hair. Matilda delighted in the animals at the event's petting zoo, smiling brightly for a photo while holding a baby goat. Matilda smiled a lot. Her nickname at school was Worry Worry, an indigenous nickname meaning the little ray of sunshine. At 6:42 p.m. that evening on the beach, two gunmen, a father and a son, shot and killed 15 people because they were Jewish, including an 87-year-old Holocaust survivor and also Matilda. She was buried in white. Her mourners wore black. Her favorite color was purple. The Bondi Beach attack was not the first anti-Semitic attack in Australia, but the last in a long string of events. The nightmare of rising anti-Semitism is not Australia's alone. In recent years, civil society organizations have documented an alarming uptick in attacks targeting Jews in Europe, Latin America, Asia, Africa, and elsewhere merely for their religious identity. This month alone, we have seen attacks on 3 synagogues in Toronto, 2 Jewish institutions in the Netherlands, a synagogue in Belgium, and a foil attack on Jews in France. Anti-Semitism, put simply, is the hatred of Jews. It stems from negative stereotypes and holds Jews as collectively responsible for societal and political ills. Across countries, government responses to anti-Semitism fall on a spectrum from active promotion to negligent complacency. As USCIRF has highlighted at previous hearings, in publications, and in its annual reports, governments that promote anti-Semitism restrict freedom of belief or religion, known as FORB, for Jews by singling them out for mistreatment. Anti-Semitic governments turn a blind eye when attackers target synagogues, Hebrew schools, kosher restaurants, and Jewish community centers. Anti-Semitism manifests across political stances, cultures, and communities. Even in countries where governments actively work to combat anti-Semitism, educating and informing societies proves challenging against a barrage of social media messaging, foreign government-sponsored misinformation, and social turmoil provoking mistrust and fear of those whose religious views are different. The result is that in many countries, simply being Jewish in public is risky. This is unconscionable. It should go without saying that wearing a Star of David in public should not be an act of bravery. Just as with a cross, a hijab, a bindi, or a turban, wearing a kippah should not make any person a target of harassment or violence. Governments also must not restrict this expression on security grounds. In 2023, our former chair, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, was asked to remove his kippah at a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Saudi Arabia on apparent security concerns, which exemplifies a broader pattern of intolerance toward Jews. We were pleased to see the Saudi government respond decisively to this incident. Since the October 7th terrorist attacks, in which Hamas killed nearly 1,200 men, women, and children, civil society organizations have documented an alarming uptick in anti Semitic incidents blaming Jews abroad for the actions of the Israeli government. Debating Israeli military actions in Gaza is not inherently anti Semitic. Just ask the thousands of Jewish Israelis who do it every day. But let me be clear. When an attacker scrawls, "child killing Jew monsters" on the walls of Congregation Emmanuel in Victoria, British Columbia, in Canada, they're not making a criticism of Israeli government policy. They're disparaging and threatening fellow citizens. Governments must uphold the fundamental right of Jewish communities to practice their faith, observe traditions, and express their identity without fear or without being subjected to discrimination. The recent spike in anti Semitic attacks on Jewish communities, however, is only the latest sign that governments are falling short of these obligations. And during this hearing, we will hear more about these shortfalls and what needs to be done to address them. It is now my pleasure to recognize USCIRF's Vice Chair, Asif Mahmood.
Thank you, Chair Hassler. I would like to welcome everyone to today's hearing and thank our witnesses for joining us. Antisemitism remains a global threat to freedom of religion or belief. It knows no one religion, background, or political persuasion. This is why governments have a crucial role to play in combating antisemitism. Protecting freedom of religion or belief for Jews should be a key priority for governments fighting discrimination and intolerance on the basis of religion. Policies to combat antisemitism protect Jews first and foremost, but in reality, they protect religious freedom for all people. Freedom of religion or belief is a universal freedom. A restriction on any single person's freedom of religion or belief is a restriction on everyone's freedom of religion or belief. Combating anti-Semitism, therefore, matters to Jews and non-Jews alike. In recent decades, the United States has led international efforts to combat anti-Semitism, primarily driven by the State Department's Office of the Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. These efforts also include the 2024 Global Guidelines for Countering Anti-Semitism. Many like-minded governments and international organizations have taken positive steps by appointing special envoys and issuing national plans to combat anti-Semitism. These plans take a whole of government approach and often use interfaith engagement as one of the several tools to combat anti-Semitism. Last year, the United Nations and the European Commission both advanced plans to combat anti-Semitism. So too did the governments of Italy, Sweden, and Australia. These plans identify combating anti-Semitism as a national priority, and their effective implementation stands to improve freedom of religion or belief protections for Jews. Combating anti-Semitism is not only a government's responsibility, but a societal issue. Effectively protecting freedom of religion or belief for Jews require governments to work together with each other, but also with Jewish communities, civil society, universities, sports teams, and interfaith groups. Recognizing the universal protection of Article 18 is a fundamental for ensuring that Jewish people are free to teach, practice, worship, and observe according to the tenets of their faith. Antisemitism is a serious and growing threat and indicative of deeper issues that affect freedom of religion or belief for everyone. Governments must address antisemitism with the understanding that anti Muslim hatred and other forms of religious intolerance are different from anti Semitism but fester under similar conditions. The current war has made an already fragile situation far more dangerous, fueling religious hatred while ordinary people pay the price. We must stay grounded in facts, confront root causes with honesty, and put humanity first, recognizing that the mistreatment of Jewish community is often a harbinger of broader freedom of religion or belief restrictions that threaten religious freedom for all. In the end, I would say killing of any innocent person, child, or adult, or of any faith must be condemned equally because protecting one life means protecting all of us. And I'm hoping after today we'll be in a better day and we'll be able to combat anti Semitism and make it our priority. To discuss some of the freedom of religion or belief restrictions facing Jews, I now turn the floor over to Commissioner Mayor Soloveitchik. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Mahmoud. Good morning to you all, and good morning to the witnesses. Thank you for being here with us today. The rise of anti-Semitism and the increasing frequency of violence against Jews and Jewish communities in Europe and elsewhere over the last few years has been an ever more urgent concern. In Europe, Jews and Jewish leaders have faced increasingly regular violent attacks. Last October, on the holiest day of the Jewish year, Yom Kippur, an attacker in Manchester, in the United Kingdom, drove a car into pedestrians and stabbed worshippers at the Heaton Park Hebrew congregation. Immediately after that attack, after the conclusion of Yom Kippur, the chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth, Ephraim Mervis, reflected that this marked, quote, the day we hoped we would never see, but which deep down we knew would come, end quote. Adding that, quote, for so long we have witnessed an unrelenting wave of Jew hatred on our streets, on campuses, on social media and elsewhere. This is the tragic result, end quote. Similar sentiments were expressed several months later by Jewish community leaders in Australia when 15 people were murdered at a Bondi Beach Hanukkah celebration in December. Along with terrifying physical assaults on worshipers and community events, we have also seen how individual Jews are oftentimes directly harassed, attacked, accosted. Just to name a few examples, among others, in a Paris, France suburb last September, an attacker assaulted a 67-year-old Jewish man wearing a kippah. In London, that same month, a man rammed an e-scooter into visibly Orthodox Jewish women and a 3-year-old child. In Venice, Italy last August, assailants attacked a Jewish man wearing a kippah alongside his pregnant wife. The striking and painful irony is that with the advent of the Abraham Accords, as certain countries in the Middle East have made extraordinary advances in religious comity and coexistence, we have seen expressed concern within those same countries about the rise of religious radicalism in Europe, radicalism that once endangered these Middle Eastern societies. The striking nature of our moment is captured in the recent announcement of the UAE government that, due to its fear that the UK government is not addressing extremism, it will no longer provide scholarships for its students to study in British universities. One Emirati authority in strategic affairs, Amjad Taha, explained that the UAE government is concerned about what he called, quote, jihadist ideology disguised as campus activism, end quote. Furthermore, as USCIRF noted in its recently released 2026 annual report, we are concerned that hostile governments have attempted to recruit criminals in Europe and Australia to carry out attacks targeting Jewish houses of worship, Holocaust memorials, restaurants, and places of business in countries such as France, the UK, and Sweden. Just over a week ago, Azerbaijan arrested at least 7 people as part of an alleged Iranian plot to target synagogues, Jewish community leaders, and the Israeli embassy in Baku. These hostile governments' stated desire to use such attacks to create social division in democratic societies is further proof of how central religious freedom is to so many other freedoms we enjoy. Last January, in one of his first actions as president, Donald Trump declared that it, quote, shall be the policy of the United States to combat anti-Semitism vigorously using all available and appropriate legal tools, end quote. In December, USCIRF welcomed the confirmation of U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, Rabbi Yehuda Kaplun, and reaffirmed the urgency of his work. Writing in Time magazine last week, Rabbi Kaplun also emphasized the importance of community building and education in fighting anti-Semitism. And he further asserted that unchecked anti-Semitism is, quote, a threat to national security and international stability, end quote, which is another succinct summation of the urgency of our subject today. I now turn the floor over to USCIRF Commissioner Rachel Lazar.
You need to unmute, Commissioner.
Sorry, everyone. Thank you, Commissioner Soloveichik, and welcome to all of our amazing witnesses. And thank you to all of you who are joining us for today's hearing on this crucially important topic. It's imperative that the U.S. government continue to make combating anti-Semitism abroad a priority. In that light, I'd like to discuss some of the broad trends USCIRF is observing regarding anti-Semitism abroad. I'm setting the table in this way to help us best identify and listen for policy recommendations for the U.S. government to address these 4 restrictions on Jewish people. Firstly, many anti-Semitic ideas hide behind ambiguity and dog whistles. In many countries, governments and societal actors make anti-Semitic statements that use deceptive and ambiguous language. While not mentioning Jews explicitly, a wink and a nudge is sufficient to convey who exactly the speaker believes controls politics, the media, or the economy. We must call out these tropes for what they are: anti-Semitism. Second, efforts to combat anti-Semitism sometimes suffer from inadequate data collection. To combat anti-Semitism, governments must understand accurately the scope of the problem. However, last month, the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights highlighted inconsistencies regarding data collection on anti-Semitism across European countries. When countries define anti-Semitic crimes in different ways, it becomes harder to identify trends and design effective policy interventions. Worse, some countries fail to collect any such data in an attempt to sweep the problem of anti-Semitism under the rug or deny entirely that such a problem exists at all. Governments have downplayed or outright denied their historic complicity in the Holocaust, venerated historical figures responsible for the systemic murder of Jews, and dragged their feet on restoring stolen Jewish property to their rightful heirs. Governments in Eastern Europe, including but not limited to Hungary, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, raise particular concerns. Governments have also failed to effectively respond to Holocaust distortion, denial, and inversion, making Jews feel that their freedom of religion or belief is not protected. The State Department's efforts on Holocaust issues, led by Special Envoy Ellen Germain, reflect an important truth. Understanding anti-Semitism in the past is critical to ensuring freedom of religion or belief for Jews in the present. This is true even when some governments would prefer to obfuscate, dilute, or forget that history. Finally, governments continue to misrepresent and defame Jews in their textbooks. They teach children that Jews are untrustworthy and nefarious, creating an environment ripe for anti-Semitism and forward restrictions on Jews. In many countries, they do so by invoking religious interpretations or justifications for this anti-Semitic content. Qatar's textbooks teach falsely that Jews believe Ezra was the son of God and that the Talmud occupies a higher place than the Torah. As USCIRF's 2025 Egypt country update notes, Egypt's textbooks teach that Jews are, quote, treacherous, close quotes, and, quote, traitors, close quotes. Saudi textbooks, while much improved from previous years, still depict Judaism as, quote, false, close quote. Furthermore, it is unclear that teachers across countries are actually teaching improved content in these textbooks. Combating anti-Semitism requires more than just words. As a bipartisan commission, USCIRF is committed to advancing FORB abroad by recommending policy actions to the U.S. Congress and administration that meaningfully promote international religious freedom. Today's hearing is an opportunity to hear directly from those on the ground, highlighting their stories and hearing their recommendations for our work, which we're really excited about. But I wanted to end with two final important notes. And forgive me, because my screen just paused at a very crucial moment so I could hit my notes. Just one second. Okay, we're back. First, the safety of Jews must never become a right or a left issue, nor should such labeling be used as a convenient excuse not to engage. Fighting hatred against Jews is crucial to ensuring freedom of religion or belief. It's a universal human right that should transcend partisanship. We urge members of Congress to join together across the aisle in protecting the fundamental right of Jewish communities to practice their faith, observe traditions, and express their identity without fear or being subjected to discrimination. And second, universal FORB protections means that we cannot successfully fight anti-Semitism without fighting other forms of religious and belief discrimination. For Jews to be safe, all types of Muslims, Christians, people of non-Abrahamic and native beliefs, and non-believers must also be safe. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said in his letter from Birmingham jail, all men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I now turn the floor back to Chair Hartzler.
Thank you, Commissioner Lasser. We'll now turn to the testimony from our witnesses. Reflecting a range of experiences and perspectives, each of our witnesses possesses their own unique expertise on anti-Semitism abroad and ways the U.S. government can effectively combat it. I'll briefly introduce them now. Ernest Herzog is Executive Director of Operations at the World Jewish Congress, an international organization that represents Jewish communities and organizations in 100 countries around the world. Ani Sophie Sabobakash is Vice President for Europe at the American Jewish Committee, where she provides strategic leadership and oversees the organization's operations and initiatives across the continent. Emma Gunsberger is Vice President of the Czech Federation of Jewish Communities and President of the Czech Union of Jewish Youth, which works to actively combat anti-Semitism, represents Jewish university students, and speaks out in defense of Jewish life and values in Czech media and public relations. We have Marcos Pekel. He's Executive Director of the Confederation of Jewish Communities of Colombia. He has advised the Organization of American States Commissioner on Anti-Semitism and is a lecturer in international affairs at Universidad de Rosario and the Diplomatic Academy of the Colombian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have Elliot Benjamin. He's vice president of the Iranian American Jewish Federation of Los Angeles, which works to protect the rights of the Iranian Jewish community and other religious minorities that have been and remain under a constant threat of persecution in Iran. And finally, Rabbi David Saperstein. He is former ambassador at large for international religious freedom for our country. He's also the senior advisor for policy and strategy to the Union of Reform Judaism, the largest Jewish denomination in North America, where he serves as the point person on anti-Semitism policy issues. We also share something in common. Rabbi Saperstein was the first chair of USCIRF in 1999. So with that, I would like to welcome our first witness, Ernest Herzog, to begin his testimony. Mr. Herzog?
Chair Hatzler, Vice Chair Mahmoud, distinguished commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to testify. Anti-Semitism in Europe has never really disappeared. What is rising sharply today are its manifestations: violence, intimidation, normalization, and the political legitimization of hostility towards Jews. History teaches us something fundamental. Anti-Semitism is not merely hatred. It is a weapon. It has long been used by extremist movements to fracture societies and weaken democratic systems. The Nazis weaponized anti-Semitism to dismantle the Weimar Republic and replace democracy with totalitarian rule of the Third Reich. The Soviet Union later re-engineered anti-Semitism under the label of anti-Zionism, but its purpose was not justice and freedom. It was dehumanization of Jews. Today, the same mechanism is being revived. Anti-Semitism is once again being used by extremist forces, Islamist movements, far-left ideologues, and far-right ethno-nationalists alike to weaken liberal democracies around the world. But we must speak clearly. The most dangerous driver of anti-Semitism in Europe today is Islamist extremism. This should not be confused with Islam, which is a religion practiced by millions of peaceful Muslims around the world. In 2024 in Sweden, authorities uncovered a plot linked to Iranian-backed criminal network targeting the Israeli embassy in Stockholm. It revealed a convergence, Islamist ideological direction intersecting with organized crime used as an operational proxy. In November 2024 in Amsterdam, after a football match, Israeli fans were hunted in the streets. Coordinated groups mobilized through message apps identifying and chasing visibly Jewish individuals. Jews were beaten, threatened, and forced into hiding under police protection. Dutch officials warned that violence recalled historic pogroms against the Jews in Europe. On October 2nd, 2025, Yom Kippur, in Manchester, a terrorist drove his vehicle into pedestrians outside the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue and then began stabbing worshippers. 2 Jews were murdered. Several others were seriously injured. British authorities declared it as a terrorist attack motivated by anti-Semitism, and the attacker himself pledged allegiance to ISIS. Just last week, in 1 week alone, anti-Semitic attacks struck Jewish institutions across Europe within few days. A synagogue damaged by an explosive device in Liège, in Belgium, an arson attack on a synagogue in Rotterdam, Holland, and an explosion next evening at the Jewish school in Amsterdam, Holland again. And then there was also an incident at a synagogue in Trondheim, Norway. These events show that anti-Semitic violence in Europe is no longer episodic. It is spreading. It is not spontaneous outrage. It is an existing ecosystem. Iran finances Islamist proxies across Europe. Hamas-linked networks operate in fundraising and mobilization structures. Qatar also has funded infrastructures that give institutional depth into Islamist movements embedded within European civil society. Networks linked to the Muslim Brotherhood and affiliated Islamist movements have established footholds across Western Europe through NGOs, religious institutions, youth initiatives, and advocacy platforms. They provide ideological and financial infrastructure behind the so-called Red-Green Alliance, the convergence between Islamist movements and segments of the radical left. Through this alliance, anti-Semitic narratives are repackaged in the language of human rights, anti-racism, anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, and social justice. This is the blueprint and the continuation of Soviet anti-Zionist doctrine. Russia also today continues to amplify anti-Semitic conspiracy narratives and exploit communal tensions to fracture democratic societies. In a recent meeting I had, the leaders of a Jewish community in Western Europe told me that they no longer publicly advertise the location of their events. Parents advise their children not to wear visible Jewish symbols in certain neighborhoods. Community members are warned to avoid speaking Hebrew in public. One leader specifically told me, 100 years ago, we were targeted by fascists. Today, we are targeted by self-declared anti-fascists. And both these groups were claiming they're building a better Europe. This surge in anti-Semitic manifestations did not begin on October 7th. The tragedy of October 7th only intensified the trends already accelerating before. Governments have a binding obligation under the international human rights law to protect Jewish communities and to prevent incitement. So for the purpose of this hearing, what can the United States do? First, elevate anti-Semitism in Europe as a core transatlantic strategy priority, not a narrow minority issue, but a test of democratic resilience in Europe. Second, to increase scrutiny of foreign financing sustaining extremist ecosystems, including Iranian proxy networks. And third, expand cooperation with European partners to identify and disrupt Islamist extremist networks operating under the disguise of civic cover, including Muslim Brotherhood linked entities and proxies and Hamas-affiliated activity. If anti-Semitism is normalized under the banner of justice, if dehumanization becomes politically fashionable, and if extremist networks operate freely under the civic cover, then what is at stake here is not only the future of Jews in Europe. What is at stake is the future of Europe itself as a free and democratic society. Jewish communities are the early warning system. When Jews are hunted in European streets, when synagogues are attacked on Yom Kippur, and when children are told to hide their identity, this is not a Jewish problem. This is a democratic emergency. Protecting Jewish life in Europe is not charity. It is a civilizational self-defense. I thank you and looking forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Herzog. And now we'll return to Anne-Sophie Sabat-Bakash.
Thank you very much. Chair Hatzler, dear members of the Commission, good morning to you all, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Anne-Sophie Sabat-Bakash, and I serve as the American Jewish Community's Vice President for Europe. I'm a French Jew, born and raised in France and still based in Paris today. I'm here to share the lived reality of Jewish communities across Europe as it stands today, one that has dramatically worsened since October 7th. Even before the Hamas attacks, the situation for Jews, as it was just said, in Europe was challenging, though highly uneven from one country to another. In France, for instance, the daily life of a Jew in central Paris differed starkly from that of a Jew living in the surrounding suburbs. Over the past decade, we observed what we call internal aliyah, smaller Jewish communities living in neighborhoods or cities where hostility and insecurity had become intolerable, and relocating to cities with stronger communal infrastructures, particularly in Paris. This movement was so significant that the 17th arrondissement, the 17th district in Paris, became the most heavily Jewish district in Europe. In Central and Eastern Europe, the threat is different. It was less physical violence, but something more insidious. State-driven attempts to rewrite the history of World War II, to minimize or distort the Holocaust, and to reshape national narratives at the expense of historical truths. Since the October 7th massacre, the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust, something fundamental has shifted, not only in Europe, but I believe globally. A surge of anti-Semitism of unprecedented speed and scale has revived fears many hoped belonged to history. Suddenly, regardless of whether I spoke with Jews from France, Belgium, the UK, Spain, or Poland, or my American colleagues, actually, they describe the same experience. Anti-Semitism is becoming normalized in public discourse and on social media. It's often politicized and weaponized by extremist movements across the spectrum. Islamism was mentioned as a key source in Europe. It's true. It's also coming from extremist ideological, political schools and movements. And with this normalization in the public discourse came a profound sense of vulnerability from Jewish communities across the European continent. And this fear is not theoretical at all. In France alone, anti-Semitic incidents rose by 1,000% just in 2023 in comparison to the previous year. This follows years that were already marked by the brutal murders of elderly Jewish women inside their homes. And since October 7th, we've seen attacks spreading to neighborhoods that were once considered as the safest in the country. In my own quiet residential town, just outside Paris, a community known for its strong and thriving Jewish life, a rabbi was assaulted in broad daylight in the street. Months later, a man armed with a knife was arrested near a local synagogue down my place. In another very nearby suburb, a Jewish teenage girl was raped because she was Jewish. Across European campuses in Brussels, Paris, London, Jewish students describe the same intangible but suffocating environment. In France, we speak of an atmospheric anti-Semitism, the feeling of being judged or targeted simply for being Jewish, or of being treated as a stand-in for a state portrayed as inherently criminal. Because security is not only about police presence and physical protection, it's also about the invisible barriers that prevent Jews from living openly as Jews. And this is, I believe, the big change that we are witnessing since October 7th. According to AGC's 2024 survey about anti-Semitism in France, 20% of French Jews have removed their mezuzah from their doorposts. 16% have changed their names on food delivery or taxi applications. I myself changed my name on Uber and other apps after October 7th. Across Europe, Jews and Israelis are refused service, denied restaurant reservations, turned away by taxi drivers, or removed from flights. A group of Jewish miners was taken off a Vueling flight in Spain. A restaurant opening in Berlin was cancelled when the owner's Jewish identity became known. In Austria, an Israeli family was violently attacked by a driver shouting he would not transport child killers. These incidents often occur alongside chants such as globalized intifada. They reflect this broader pattern: anti-Semitism disguised as anti-Zionism or Israel hatred, expressed through exclusion, humiliation, and discrimination in everyday life. Our survey about anti-Semitism in France, released in 2024, showed that the hatred of Israel is now perceived as the leading source of anti-Semitism. And this perception has been sharply rising over the years if we compare to our survey in 2022 and in 2018, sorry. At the same time, attempts by several European governments to restrict core Jewish religious practices such as circumcision or kosher slaughter send a chilling message that Jewish life is unwelcome not only socially, but legally. So this is why AGC is urging European governments, and we believe that the US Congress can be very supportive in our demands towards European partners to expand not only their understanding of contemporary antisemitism, but the means dedicated to implement a comprehensive response to the fight against it. So we are asking to, one, substantially increase funding and resources for the physical protection of Jewish communities across the continent. And we know that there are several European countries where there is still an important lack and difficulties to protect themselves, to have the sufficient means to do so. Two, to ensure responsible monitoring of public demonstrations, protecting Jewish citizens in real time, while safeguarding, of course, freedoms. Third, combat discriminatory exclusion by enforcing anti-discrimination laws across all service sectors, also when it comes to discriminations against Jews. And it's something, it's a new phenomenon. So European governments needs to get not to get used to it, but to address it very concretely. First, we ask them to broaden access to justice for victims through better funding, translation services, and support mechanisms. We call it a zero tolerance policy, and it's something that we lack in some European countries. 5, to protect core religious freedoms, of course, ensuring circumcision and kosher slaughter remain legal and accessible. 6, to address Israel-related antisemitism more explicitly, not only by understanding it, but in all public policies aimed at combating antisemitism and educating about Jewish life and identity to implement this new reality with concrete actions. Now, in the current context of the war with the Iranian regime, I must also highlight the growing Iranian-linked threat to Jewish and Israeli targets in Europe. Investigations are still ongoing, but we now have already seen attacks or disrupted plots in Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, and Cyprus, where Hamas operative planned attacks against Jewish and Israeli sites and was just arrested. For years, AGC has urged a full terrorist designation of the IRGC in Europe. The EU's decision last January was an important step, but it must now be implemented rigorously. Iran and all its proxies, financial networks, operational infrastructures, and activities must be identified, exposed, and neutralized because they pose a serious direct threat on Jewish communities and not only on all vulnerable communities. Now, to conclude, ultimately, the goal is not merely only to protect Jewish life, it's to enable it to flourish. And despite this unprecedented rise in antisemitism I just described, I want to conclude in paying tribute to the solidarity and resilience also shown by European Jewish communities since October 7th. It has been extraordinary. Jews have not withdrawn. To the contrary, they have strengthened their bonds and reaffirmed their place and identity in European societies. And I believe this resilience must be met with the whole of society approach that we advocate for at AGC. This is our society's collective responsibility. So at AGC, the Global Jewish Advocacy Organization, this is really our mission. Last year in Paris, we launched the first French-American Forum on Antisemitism, and it proved how essential transatlantic cooperation is in the face of antisemitism that has become this global scourge. And we hope that these exchanges, like the one we have today, will continue, and you can count on AGC as a trusted partner. So I want to thank you again for your attention and your support to European Jewish communities, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you very much, Anne-Sophie. Now we'll turn to Emma Gunsberger. Please proceed.
Dear Chair Hartzler, dear Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Emma Ginsberger, and I serve as the Vice President of the Federation of Jewish Communities in Czech Republic, and I have been active in Jewish communal life since childhood. I speak to you today as someone who experiences daily that anti-Semitism in Europe is not a relic of the past. I am the first person to be born into democracy and freedom in my whole family. My parents and grandparents grew up under communism, and their experiences remind me that freedom cannot be taken for granted. Although the Czech Republic was never officially part of the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia lived under Soviet domination as a satellite state from 1948 until 1989. During that period, anti-Semitism did not disappear. It was simply reframed in ideological language. The communist regimes rarely spoke openly about the Jews. Instead, they spoke about the Zionists, imperialists, and cosmopolitans. Yet the target was often the same. Jewish identity was viewed with suspicion, connections to Israel were treated as politically dangerous, and anti-Semitic stereotypes were repackaged as political accusations. One of the clearest examples was the Slansky trial that happened in Czechoslovakia in 1952, a major communist show trial in which 11 of the 14 defendants were Jewish and were accused of participating in so-called Zionist conspiracy. This system allowed regimes to deny anti-Semitism while simultaneously mobilizing it. Anti-Semitism did not disappear. It merely changed vocabulary. Many believed that these narratives ended with the fall of communism. For a time, it seemed that way. Jewish life in Central Europe began to rebuild, and democratic institutions took root. Yet in recent years, we have begun to see something deeply troubling: the return of very similar narratives, often using different language, but drawing on the same underlying ideas. The rhetoric that once portrayed Zionists as agents of imperialism are increasingly reappearing in public discourse, particularly since attacks of October 7th, 2023. Anti-Semitism in Central and Eastern Europe did not begin on October 7th. It did not suddenly emerge because of events in the Middle East. Anti-Semitism is a long-standing European pathology that repeatedly adapts to the political language of the moment. Since October 7th, demonstrations connected to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have taken place around the world, including in the Czech Republic. And of course, a peaceful protest is a democratic right. However, in many cases, the rhetoric has crossed the line from political criticism into anti-Semitic narratives. Portraying Jews collectively as aggressors, spreading conspiracies about Jewish power, and denying the Jewish historical connection to Israel. In autumn 2025, anti-Semitic graffiti referencing Israel appeared at a Jewish cemetery in the Czech Republic, directly targeting the Federation of Jewish Communities in Czech Republic. Jewish cemeteries are not political spaces. They are places of memory. When Jewish cemeteries are targeted, it is not foreign policy criticism. It is hatred. There was also an attempted arson attack on a synagogue in Brno, the second biggest city in Czechia. Not a state institution, but a house of worship. Even unsuccessful attacks send a powerful message to the Jewish families: you are not safe. We are also witnessing growing anti-Semitism on university campuses and in digital spaces, where Jewish students report intimidation, exclusion, and harassment. I can testify that myself as a student. The most dangerous shift today is not only the number of incidents, it is the erosion of boundaries. Anti-Semitic rhetoric is moving from extremist fringes into the mainstream discourse under the cover of geopolitical debate. Let me speak personally. Young Jews in my community now ask whether they should hide their Jewish symbols in public. Parents calculate security risks before attending synagogue or Jewish events. Permanent police protection around Jewish institutions has become new routine. Normalization is the new and real danger. Anti-Semitism rarely begins with violence. It begins with language, with relativization, with double standards, and with the suggestion that Jewish concerns are exaggerated. History in our region teaches us that when societies fail to respond early, the consequences can be devastating. Anti-Semitism is not only a Jewish problem, it reflects deeper fractures within a society. Jews are often the canaries in the coal mine, the first signal that something is going wrong in a society, that democratic norms are weakening, and that dangerous ideologies are beginning to spread. When anti-Semitism rises, it rarely stops with the Jews. For this reason, monitoring anti-Semitism is not only about protecting Jewish communities, it is about protecting democratic societies themselves. For this reason, I would respectfully offer several recommendations to fully implement the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism in law enforcement and judicial training, to ensure sustained security funding for Jewish institutions such as synagogues, schools, and community centers, to actively confront Holocaust distortion and historical revisionism, to strengthen efforts to monitor and prosecute online incitement, and to recognize anti-Semitism as a threat to democratic stability, not as a niche minority issue. Because anti-Semitism is not only about Jews, it is a stress test for democracy. As I already said, I am the first generation in my family to be born into freedom and democracy. I hope not to be the last. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Emma. Really appreciate your remarks. Now we'll turn to Marcus Peckel.
Very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioners, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. The first hat I'm going to wear is that of Commissioner of Antisemitism at the Latin American Jewish Congress. Antisemitism has increased significantly both in the number of incidents and in activity across social media. The rise has generated a heightened sense of vulnerability among members of the Jewish communities. However, anti-Semitism on the continent remains at a lower level than in other parts of the world, and we have not experienced violent incidents or attacks against Jewish institutions or individuals, such as those we have heard so far here. We hope it will remain that way, although we cannot be certain that this will be the case. Throughout the Gaza war and now the new war, Jewish communities continue their Jewish life unabated, both within communal institutions and in public places, albeit with increased security. In Latin America, anti-Semitism has increasingly become a partisan issue. Left-wing parties and governments, such as those of Colombia, Chile's outgoing administration, and Brazil, often employ extreme anti-Israel rhetoric, while right-wing parties and governments, such as those in Argentina and Paraguay, tend to position themselves as allies of Israel and the Jewish communities. In some instances, Jewish institutions have been accused of being accomplices to the actions and policies of the Israeli government. I must mention that Chile is a very difficult place due to the presence of the largest Palestinian community outside the Middle East, 400,000 strong. With this introduction, allow me to go to a worst case of anti-Semitism in Latin America. I regret to say it's been my home country, Colombia. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Colombia's president is among the most vocal and hostile head of state toward Israel and the world today. Historically, we have had in Colombia low levels of anti-Semitism, but that changed after October 7, 2023. The government of President Petro never condemned the massacre by Hamas, and since then, our road has been downhill with regard to anti-Semitism. I may not be mistaken if I state that Colombia's president is probably the most hostile and vocal chief of state against Israel in the world. And at this point, I regret to say, distinguished people, that we are victims of state-sponsored anti-Semitism. Referring to President Petro, the former special envoy to combating anti-Semitism at the Department of State, Deborah Lipstadt, posted on the 20th of September of 2024, quote, Colombia President Gustavo Petro continued rhetoric normalizes anti-Semitism. We cannot accept this. We cannot tolerate this. We must condemn this harmful narrative, unquote. President Petro frequently uses the term genocide in reference to Israel and has accused governments, such as the United States government, of being accomplice to genocide or acting like Nazis. Colombia severed diplomatic relations with Israel in May 2024 after being the strongest ally of the Jewish state in Latin America, albeit a consular office remains in place. During September 2025 UN General Assembly, President Petro declared, Jews are not the chosen people, humanity is. That was the third time President Petro used this expression in large public gatherings, which of course has nothing to do with Gaza or Israel. In June 2025, Colombia hosted a summit of the so-called Hatch Group, which aims to isolate Israel in the world stage. Keynote speakers included well-known anti-Semites such as Francesca Albanese and Jeremy Corbyn, both hosted by President Petro at the Presidential Palace. In a country like Colombia, where, as previously stated, anti-Semitism has been low, and with almost no episode of violence against Jews or Jewish institutions, our deep worry is that the government rhetoric will trickle down to sectors of the population. And we already see some worrying symptoms of that occurring. The worst of that incident occurred in March 2026, just a month ago, even this month, when a left-wing magazine financed by the government printed a long article accusing the Jewish Day School, in which kids study, of supporting the genocide in Gaza because a post in the school's Instagram account showed pictures of 10-year-olds wearing Adidas jerseys. The same article accuses the Jewish community and the representative organization, the Confederation, of which I represent, of accomplices to genocide and of recruiting youngsters to the IDF. Anti-Semitic, anti-Israel graffiti had appeared in various locations throughout the country. Since October 7, 2023, Jewish synagogues have received 11 bomb threats, all of which have been reported to the Office of the Attorney General. In May 2025, the FARC, one of the armed groups operating the country for years and years and years, released a carefully staged video featuring uniformed combatants threatening the Jewish community as being Zionist and supporting genocide. Throughout the Gaza war till now, Jewish community in Colombia continue Jewish life unabated, strengthened and strong within communal institutions and public places, although with increased security. I must state that we have received very good protection by the National Police from the October 7th till today. All of the above concerns and facts that I have shared with you have been formally conveyed to the United States Embassy in Bogota, as well as to the U.S. envoy to monitoring and combating anti-Semitism. The United States holds a very important sway over Colombia. We would like Congress and the White House, even as a result of this important hearing, and the State Department, to bring this issue of anti-Semitism and state-sponsored anti-Semitism to the attention of the Colombian government before it's too late. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Beckel. I appreciate your comments. Now we'll turn to Elliot Benjamin.
Good morning. Thank you. Allow me to begin by thanking Chair Hartzler, Vice Chair Mahmoud, and the Commission on behalf of the Iranian American Jewish Federation in Los Angeles for the opportunity to testify regarding the current condition for Jews in Iran. The Iranian American Jewish Federation was established shortly after the 1979 revolution with the mission of safeguarding the safety and security of Iranian Jews, particularly those remaining in Iran. Jews have lived in Iran for more than 2,700 years. While Iran's constitution recognizes Jews as a religious minority and reserves a parliamentary seat for a Jewish representative, this formal recognition masks systematic repression that has intensified in recent years. Jews may practice their faith, but they remain second-class citizens, facing discrimination, arbitrary detention, fear of persecution, exclusion from senior position, and constant surveillance. Upon coming to power, one of the Islamic Republic's first acts was the execution of Habib el-Ghanaian, a prominent Jewish leader, after a 20-minute trial without legal representation on charges including friendship with the enemies of God. His execution sent shockwaves throughout the community and accelerated Jewish immigration. From more than 100,000 before the revolution, the population has declined to approximately 10 to 15,000 today, largely due to discrimination, repression, and fear. Anti-Semitism in Iran has been widespread during the past 47 years and has increased in recent years. It has included blood libel accusations, anti-Semitic textbooks, state media propaganda, including programs targeting children, glorification of terrorist proxies such as Hamas and Hezbollah, and Holocaust denial. Under President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who called the Holocaust a myth, Iran hosted state-sponsored Holocaust denial conferences and cartoon contests. Initially, the regime claimed to distinguish between Zionism and Judaism. Ayatollah Khomeini stated that Zionism has nothing to do with religion, suggesting Jews could safely remain in the country. However, this distinction has eroded significantly, particularly since October 7th, 2023, as anti-Israel rhetoric has merged with traditional anti-Semitism. State media increasingly conflates Jews and Zionists and promotes dehumanizing portrayals. Recent examples include the following. In a November 10th, 2024 appearance on Iranian state television, Revolutionary Guard General Mohammad Jafar Asadi blamed the evil Jews and described them as the biggest enemies of Muslims, stating that there was no difference between Jews and Zionists. In a December 30, 2024 Jerusalem Post opinion piece, author Dan Dicker documented escalating regime Jew hatred and reported that imams, officials, and media figures had moved beyond anti-Zionist rhetoric to anti-Jewish slander, including the following. Mohammad Ghazali, son of a prominent Ayatollah, blamed Jews for the regime's problems. The Imam of the city of Ghazvin declared on state television that Jews are greedy and should live in fear of Muslims. Revolutionary Guard General Mohammad Jafar Asadi said the cursed Jews had wronged the Middle East and affirmed there was no difference between Jews and Zionists. Iranian author Mohammad Tarzahedi claimed on television that the Jewish holiday of Purim is against Iranians and the Aryan race and was created to fabricate Jewish history and victimhood. Before a major speech by former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, eulogizers called Jews infidels and said they should expect a plague from Ali's followers. On March 16, 2025, regime-linked groups hoisted the Palestinian flag at the mausoleum of Esther and Mordechai in the city of Hamadan, one of Iran's holiest Jewish sites, which has previously been attacked with fireborne bombs and been vandalized. On July 2, 2025, state media broadcast music with lyrics stating, quote, "We will uproot Jews with authority and strength," close quote. On July 5th, 2025, state television aired the cleric claiming Jews killed a central Shiite imam. Following the 12-day war with Israel last year, at least 35 Jews, including one United States citizen, was arrested for alleged contacts with Israel, including social media activity. During the nationwide protests in January of this year and the subsequent and current war with Israel, there have also been reports of Jewish arrests, although verification has been difficult due to internet shutdown and fear of retaliation. Compounding these dangers, the United States Refugee Program for Iranian religious minorities, also referred to as the Lautenberg Amendment program, which for decades allowed Iranian Jews to resettle safely in the United States, was fully shut down as of December of 2025. In conclusion, although Jews in Iran remain a legally recognized religion, the steady escalation of anti-Semitism, the collapse of any distinction between Judaism and Zionism, arrests, propaganda, and repression, combined with the direct confrontation between Iran and Israel last year and again today, have created a climate of fear, insecurity, and a volatile scenario presenting material safety risk to the Jewish community. Independent human rights organizations continue to affirm that Jewish religious freedom in Iran remains severely constrained, particularly during periods of political unrest such as today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. And now we'll turn to our final witness, Rabbi David Saperstein, and then we'll have question and answer time. So, Rabbi Saperstein.
Chair Hartzler, Vice Chair Mahmoud, and distinguished members of the Commission, and allow me to acknowledge the dedicated staff of the Commission as well. The global spread of anti-Semitism and other efforts to curtail religious freedom of Jews, including restrictions on kosher as well as halal slaughtering and on circumcision, also affecting both Jews and Muslims, have left Jews increasingly frightened and uncertain of their place, their safety in their own communities. This very month, we felt it keenly and urgently with attacks on our West Bloomfield, Michigan synagogue by membership one of the largest congregations in the world, and attacks on synagogues from various streams, denominations in Belgium and Toronto. So I affirm my colleagues' descriptions on the scope and urgency of this crisis, and will focus my remarks on policy issues with 6 recommendations that I hope USCIRF will make to the administration in its efforts to counter anti-Semitism. And in some cases, I urge you to make those recommendations sooner than your next annual report. 1, countering anti-Semitism requires countering other forms of hate. In our efforts to confront, delegitimize, and combat anti-Semitism, we must embrace the paradox that anti-Semitism has distinctive characteristics and is capable of taking on a life of its own regardless of what happens in the rest of society. Think of a broad range of secular and religious-based conspiracy theories about Jews, even while simultaneously recognizing that unless we ensure freedom, equality, and security for all peoples and all religions, and bring an end to hate speech and hate crimes against every vulnerable group, Jews will never be safe. 2, the United States should fight hate and discrimination by supporting democracy and human rights across the globe. Since the Age of Reason began, Jews have been safest in pluralistic democracies, and most at risk when those democracies have been weakened or abandoned, as was paradigmatically the path from the Weimar Republic to Nazi Germany. Without robust rule of law, without fundamental freedom of speech, press, protest, association, you cannot protect religious freedom for individuals or communities, nor implement the fundamental civic application of religious freedom, that no one's rights as a citizen should ever depend upon their religious identity, religious practices, or peaceful religious practices. When representatives of this administration embrace far-right figures, it represents a major roadblock for our efforts to counter anti-Semitism. 3, encourage and support building coalitions of allies to fight anti-Semitism and hate more broadly, and train legal advocates and media truth-tellers to defend and lift up these efforts. Jews make up a very small percentage of the populations in all the countries outside the U.S. in which we have seen a resurgence of anti-Semitism. In the long run, it is not a battle that can be fought effectively alone. Only when we succeed in building broad-based coalitions of decency committed to fighting anti-Semitism and other forms of hate can we be effective. The significant diminishment of the programmatic funding at state of the USCIRF office, the DRL office, and our information services has greatly undermined our ability to nurture and support such efforts. Robust programmatic funds should be restored to invest in cultivating and training leaders in such coalition building, in interfaith networking and cooperation, as well as in developing legal advocates for religious freedom and in training and supporting the media to lift up the plight of the victims of anti-Semitism, of discrimination and persecution of Jews and non-Jews. My organization supports the IRA definition, but only when it is used for its original purpose, which is, as IRA itself says, not as a legally binding standard. We should affirm it as a valuable tool in the education, training, and monitoring efforts of government officials, law enforcement, institutional civic leaders, as noted by the Biden national strategy. Other more current and nuanced definitions, such as nexuses with which I am connected, can play equally important roles in such efforts. I'm deeply alarmed that at a recent meeting with Jewish leaders, our current ambassador and special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, who is doing very important work in countering anti-Semitism, was heard to call for the use of IRA's definition as a legally binding standard. This approach will be deeply divisive, counterproductive step, and I urge the Commission to seek clarification of Ambassador Kaplan's position on this issue and affirm that IRA continues to be used as the educational, training, and monitoring tool it is intended to be. 5, there are structural steps the White House should take that would send strong signals regarding its commitment to IRF and combating anti-Semitism. First, rebuild DRL and strengthen the human rights democracy building efforts of the State Department. Second, try to have Mark Walker confirmed again to try to have him confirmed as the AAL, or choose another candidate to confirm as AL while Mark Warner continues his good efforts. Third, nominate and push through the confirmation a qualified nominee for the new elevated position of the Undersecretary of State for Foreign Assistance, Humanitarian Affairs, and Religious Freedom. Fourth, keep the Department of State's Office for the Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues separate and fully empowered within the State Department to continue to address the legal, educational, socio-emotional, and moral responsibilities that arise from the Holocaust. These two offices have distinct responsibilities requiring distinct skills. Here. And the second, within this rubric, build on the strongest part of the Biden administration's all of government, all of society approach, much of which is embodied in this administration deserves credit for building on the Biden administration's global guidelines for countering anti-Semitism. And finally, we need to find the right balance between addressing and countering hate speech and protecting freedom of speech, being as consistent in addressing hate speech from the right as from Islamist or left voices as well. So thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning, and I think we all look forward to the question period.
Thank you, Ambassador Saperstein, and really appreciate your 1, 2, 3 recommendations for us, as well as all of your witnesses for giving us specific policy recommendations. That's very, very helpful to us. Now we're going to enter our question and answer time, and I'll start with one question, then I'll turn to the other commissioners for question. But I'd like to address my question, I guess, to Emma Gunsberger. I realize that Chechnya is the site of a concentration camp. And so in your leadership role, do you see linkages between Holocaust education and combating anti-Semitism? And does your family history motivate an interest in ensuring Holocaust education in Chechnya and throughout Europe? So could you speak a little bit to the importance of education and the status of Holocaust education in Europe?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, so Czechoslovakia was unfortunately occupied by Nazi Germany, and both Czechia and Slovakia were sites where concentration camps were present, and from those concentration camps, Jews were later transported to the east, mostly to Poland, including my own family. My great-grandparents were Holocaust survivors themselves, and many of my other family members were victims that didn't survive. So, to answer your question, I think that Holocaust education is a great problem because, as it has been already 86 years since the end of the war, to many people, Holocaust feels as something very historic and not relevant to our current lives and society anymore. So the emphasis is not as big to many people. They feel like we should focus on the present, not on the past. And to us as the Jewish community and people who have been personally affected by the Holocaust, we want to call on our governments and on our societies that actually learning about the Holocaust is not only important for us as the Jewish community, but also for the societies that have been complicit or directly responsible for the Holocaust, because it is a lesson that is important to every democratic society. What we can unfortunately see is that Holocaust distortion since October 7th has become a more problematic issue than in the past. In Slovakia, it's way bigger problem than in Czechia. As you may know, the Slovak state has been directly complicit with the Nazi Germany regime, and until today, that is unfortunately not reflected both in the education but also in remembrance programs. Slovakia, in a similar manner as Poland, portrays their history as that Slovaks were the victims, not the perpetrators, which is simply not true. In Czechia, this is not as big problem, but unfortunately, many kids nowadays, they don't care about Holocaust anymore. They feel like it's something very historic, and it's something that they don't take seriously enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, as a former teacher, I think that's really important, and hope that there will be more Holocaust education so that younger generations remember and know and don't repeat it. Now I'd like to turn to our Vice Chair, Asif Mahmood, for a question he may have.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much. And I again want to applaud the staff for this effort to get so much perspective from all over the world. Such an important issue, and everybody over here is really master in their thing. I have two questions. I mean, I have so many questions, but for the time, I have two questions. My first question is geared towards Emma and Sophie. Um, the topic we didn't discuss a lot more, and I am getting this towards you because I am going to address about young people. What I believe is attacking on the synagogues and attacking Jews with the symbolic presentation of Jewish thing isn't one thing, but social media has gone to an exponential level. And so many young people are being kind of brainwashed. And what you see today, although I'm not expert on that, if you compare about even 5 years ago, it is gone to the level where you will see even normal people who have no idea about Judaism, they will be also coming against it. And people, kids going to school, kids going to sports, kids going to participating in the community activities are being put in a huge danger, not just physically, emotionally, psychologically, with the comments, with the bullying and all that stuff. How we can really address that? Number one, to stop that. Number two, to work with the Jewish kids on this thing, because I personally believe that is the biggest challenge right now on that. So I will want, and my next question will be to my dear friend David, but I'll ask after that, after they can address that. And anybody can jump into that. I just picked two young people because I think they have more experience in this.
Thank you very much. I am happy to start if you want, Emma. First of all, to say that your observations are fully right, and I can quote our recent survey focusing on France and French young Jews, the experience of French young Jews, and the perceptions of also the young generation in France more broadly. And when we ask the French society at large, for instance, where is the first place where they have already witnessed anti-Semitic comments or behavior, the first place they mention is social media. And when it comes to the experience of young Jews, all the data that I shared, when you look at young French Jews between 18 and 24, the experience is much more higher. So they have suffered from anti-Semitism like 20 points more than the older generation, both verbally and online, but also like when it comes to physical attacks, it's also very clear. So we are very much worried. What I think is also connected to what you was just discussed about education and the distance of young generation to history. And we are trying at AJC to develop programs to attract the younger generation to be more aware of World War II history. So because we've also realized, we've also made a survey a few years ago about the French knowledge about genocide, and we also see that the younger generation is much less aware of what it means, and it creates a gap in the perception they have of Jews, and they, in comparison to older generation, the paradox is that they don't see Jews as potential victims. Also, you know, when we ask the question about which minority they consider as the most, the group that is the most victim of discrimination or hatred, Jews come actually the last ones. And it's very different when you look at older generation. Now when it comes to what kind of answer we can bring on social medias, in Europe, as you know, we have more restrictive rules about hate speech. So in France, we have some tools to be more forceful in asking platforms to remove hateful contents from their platforms, and also to ask them to be more proactive in providing counter speech and more positive content. And we also work with other civil society organizations to promote positive speech online about Jews. And we realized we've also made a survey on what is having an impact on social medias and what is creating positive or negative comments about Jews online. And we've come to the conclusion that all the content related to Jewish history, Jewish life, Jewish identity that is promoted or posted, you know, by young influencers is actually creating much more positive perception of Jews. So we are trying to promote this kind of initiatives. And yeah, so I think there are two different ways to control more of what's happening. And in Europe, we have more tools to do that. But I think the most important is also to counter what we see online with more positive content about Jewish life and Jewish history.
I completely agree with what Anne-Marie said, and I think there are 2 points which we should call upon. The first is for sure monitoring and being more restrictive with social media and what's being published on them, because whatever's illegal offline is also illegal online. However, it's very difficult to persecute it because when an account is either anonymous or when something is said online, it's obviously harder to persecute the perpetrator. Also, we need to acknowledge that some statements or some symbols are, as we say, awful but lawful. So they are anti-Semitic, but they are still lawful under the freedom of speech. But what I think is equally important to address is that we need to invest more. And when I say we, I mean European governments, I mean international structures, also the US government, into education. And when it comes to education and social media, what we should focus on is media literacy, because many young people nowadays, they get their information from social media, and that is relevant both when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but oftentimes also the Holocaust. And there are so many misinformation and disinformation online. and it's spreading really fast, and these narratives are super harmful. Also, what we have witnessed is that after the full-scale invasion of Russian aggression into Ukraine, there is more anti-Semitic propaganda coming from Russia, and that is also influencing us here, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. And this is something that influences our societies a lot. It influences our Jewish communities, and it is not being addressed enough. So that's something I would like to shift your attention towards, because this is a big problem, and I think it's something that we need to concentrate on.
Sure. Ernest Herzog, you want to jump in there?
Yes, Vice Chair Mahmoud, thank you very much for this question. It's very relevant, and as you said, one of the most important ones when it comes to this topic. I would like to address this from by the way, I agree with everything that was said so far on the topic. I would just maybe like to zoom out and address this topic from a kind of bird's view perspective for us to also understand what is going on here. First of all, social media incitement is the game of numbers. Jewish population around the world is somewhere between 15 and 16 million altogether. So if all the Jews around the world would be on social media and typing, they would still be outnumbered by those who do not like Jews, who do not like the state of Israel, or who do not like those who support it. And in the world of social media, the state of Israel and Zionism as a word just became euphemism. Zionists became euphemism for Jews because it's obviously more acceptable, and also it applies a lot of the times for the state of Israel according to the IRA definition, which we already mentioned. Second thing is, and it's very important, we are all exposed to anti-Semitism online to a certain extent in the languages we understand. It's English, it's Spanish, it's sometimes other languages. But what is happening in those languages that we do not understand, languages like Arabic, Farsi, but also languages in Europe that are not so common, Lithuanian, Hungarian, Latvian, Slovak, Czech, Croatian, Serbian, Albanian, etc. There is a complete Wild West there when it comes to anti-Semitism. Nothing is monitored, and not much is being done because obviously the companies, the social media companies are lacking personnel who could be moderating this. So the responsibility on one lies, as we already mentioned, on social media companies. But we have to understand one thing. There is a situation between profit and responsibility. And as mentioned before, in the United States, there's also the First Amendment and the freedom of speech. In Europe, there are different tools that actually could be employed. However, social media companies, unfortunately, make money from hate. It has been proven that hateful messages get more clicks, get more forwards, get more likes. There is more interaction with those than everybody loves everybody kind of postings, where actually there is not too much interaction. Interaction is what makes money for these companies, because interaction is what sells to marketing. And unfortunately, this is this is the area in which a solution needs to be found to keep these companies if not legally, then at least socially and ethically responsible to do the right thing, because they're the only ones who can moderate this, because it is happening inside of their environment. And as I always say, if somebody opens up a bar and all of a sudden a bunch of neo-Nazis start gathering in this bar and start talking about beating up black people or people of color or Jews, that owner would probably call the police, shut down their bar, move to another neighborhood, or do something about it. When the same thing happens in a virtual bar, we are lacking that response from the owner of the bar, if you follow me. So I think this is the area in which something can be done, the question is, obviously, with different countries, there's different legal frameworks, and it needs to be always within, obviously, the rule of law. Thank you.
Very good. David Saperstein.
Yeah, very briefly, because I know you want to get to other questions.
Yes.
We're seeing the American-based social media companies lowering their protection against extreme hate speech at this particular time. I just think the administration should be consistent. It has been, Europe has higher standards than American law would allow for, but this administration has primarily criticized those standards in terms of issues raised by right-wing speech in Europe. We're not saying anything about efforts in Germany or UK to shut down pro-Palestinian speech as well. Whatever the administration ought to do, it ought to be consistent in terms of addressing these. And we do need to, hate speech really leads to hate crimes. And we ought never to forget that. And we need to try to find the best ways to counter it in America within our standards of First Amendment protections for free speech.
Thank you. Elliot Benjamin.
Thank you. I know the question was geared more towards social media, and admittedly, I'm not a young person, but I have a 13-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter. And 2.5 years ago, shortly actually on October 7th, he was in a public elementary school in Los Angeles, California, and he and my wife experienced anti-Semitism from his classmate, an 11-year-old. And I think that while it's important to have the standards for social media and to make sure that there are mechanisms in place to stop the hate speech in that forum, I think education at a younger age, as you were mentioning earlier, Chair Hartzler, is vitally important. And I think what I have seen in our efforts here, both personal and on behalf of our community, is that there is a very strong resistance by the public school system, at least here in California, and I know that it's true in other places throughout the United States and most likely throughout the world. There's a resistance to introducing that education into the school systems. And I think that's an area where a lot of time and effort and funds need to go into. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, if you let me, it's really compelling question, and I'm just going to request that make it answer a little very concise, and maybe my question is actually geared toward Ambassador Saperstein. Ambassador, to start with, I have tremendous respect. You are a stalwart. You are really an icon for religious freedom and bringing interfaith harmony and working not just in the United States, all over the world. And I honestly, words cannot express your work. Regardless of which side you are loved with everybody because you talk the logic, you talk the honesty, and you bring the issues the way they pose. And my question is very candid. You have been doing this for many decades, and we realize that your work is getting harder and harder, especially in last couple of 3 years. Things have gone even more in a wrong way. How would you address this now in present situation as compared to what you have done in many decades, especially the side which incite violence and incite hate has so much tool. And I want to be very candid. It is very hard to, there is no words what Hamas does and what Hezbollah does, and there's so many ISIS does, and so many organizations. They have just their whole motto is hate, and their whole motto is just demolish and kill others. But on the uh, uh, side where people who are innocent people who have been living, when you bring kids literally looking for water and wash their face and take a sip of water, women running from one house to other house, and when those pictures and those things come out of the war, does it make it harder for your life? There is a way that you can come up and say, okay, well, you know what, we need to talk about and we need to raise voice on that too, because killing with the killing, you kill one person, we're going to kill 10, it's not going to be a solution. So how we can work together, how we can bring this sentiment, because this is what I hear every day. And you have noticed even not only certain people who have been doing this thing, even Christian conservative are going on a very extra mile creating Jewish hate. So I just want to, just from you, because I don't want to leave the time for the questions for other commissioners, and thank you.
First, thank you. I'm deeply touched by the appreciation that you expressed. And it's mutual, you know. We've had the opportunity to work together over the years, and I appreciate your work as well. You've opened up a very large topic. Let me try to do it as briefly as I can. Just make a couple of short points. One, I've often made the argument when it comes to fighting religious freedom that while here in the United States, we have some very tendentious debates about how to balance out religious freedom claims, sincere religious freedom claims, and civil rights claims and protection, of course, civil rights. And I know people who are both witnesses and members of the commission might differ on those kinds of questions here. Internationally, I pray for the day when that is the debate that we have about religious freedom, because as we've heard today, we're dealing with overt persecution. We're dealing with problems of people going to prison, being killed because of their religious beliefs, here of ethnic cleansing because of people's religious beliefs. And on those issues, we've been able to work together very well and can continue to do it. Secondly, the war in Gaza and what's going on now in Iran here raises very, very painful kinds of issues. Whenever war is fought, innocent people are being killed, and the question, international law, is aimed at constraining the damage done to civilians as much as possible during warfare. And good moral people can differ over to what extent those international constraints have been breached in the way that in what Hamas did in terms of the massacres that happened on October 7th, the way that Israel responded to it. And free speech does allow for very painful things that may be anathema and abhorrent to us to be expressed and protected here. So yes, here there's no getting around the fact that the enormous pain, the enormous damage done by October 7th and by Israel's response has led people to believe that they're going to take steps to try and address it in ways that we, I think, all of us agree are just simply wrong here. It may help explain why they do it, but it doesn't make it right to attack houses of worship with people praying, schools and institutions going about their work. Finally, here, we ought to recognize the growth of Islamophobia that has happened as a result of the same set of facts on the ground, which has intensified in many areas around the world as well. I really was proud that the Biden administration's anti-Semitism strategy lifted up 20 times, talked about what's happening with Islamophobia, feeding what's happening with anti-Semitism as well. And the Islamophobia national strategy did the same with anti-Semitism. Here, they are connected with each other. And again, as you indicated, we cannot address one or the other without addressing all forms of hate against it. We're on a cultural basis, on a civic basis, on a legal basis, on a national security basis. We have to fight hate altogether, even while recognizing that each of those has its own distinct characteristics that require strategies and tactics to address those particular forms of hate as well. So I really thank you for the question. It is one of the most challenging parts of this moment in history that we are all grappling with.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair,
Yes.
for giving me so much time. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And we do have 15 minutes left in our hearing. We have 3 more commissioners. We want to get to all of their questions. So now I turn to my colleague, Mir Asilovicek.
Thank you very much, Chair Hartzler. I have a lot to say about what was recently discussed, especially the way media has itself irresponsibly portrayed some of the aforementioned conflicts and the way that feeds into narratives that themselves fuel Jew hatred and anti-Semitism. But given my very limited time, I just wanted to focus on my own question about what is taking place in Europe. And so my question is this. In 2007, then British Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote a book warning that European societies, in the name of multiculturalism, were actually allowing civic society to be undone with no focus on integration, leaving a series of fragmented groups with, in his words, no overarching structure of meaning to hold it all together. Rabbi Sacks further strikingly argued in an article as follow-up that in such a setting, the more communities do integrate into civic society, the less their concerns are addressed. This is what he wrote in 2011 in the Times of London. Quote, I have never known the British Jewish community, especially its university students, more anxious about the future than they are today. But I have heard the same from many Hindus and Sikhs. They feel that the more they seek to integrate, the less attention is paid to them by the government and the media. And Rabbi Sacks added, that too is terribly dangerous for the British future. And he further explained, without shared values and a sense of collective identity, no society can sustain itself for long, end quote. He wrote that 15 years ago. Now, the subjects of multiculturalism and integration are, of course, at the heart of larger political debates throughout many countries in Europe, far beyond the scope of our hearing. But I was hoping that those testifying from Europe could reflect a bit on what they think about Rabbi Sacks's argument as it relates to the current urgent work of ensuring the safety and well-being of European Jewish communities today. Thanks very much.
Yes, Sophie.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very important question. I'm glad to chime in, and I'll be very, very quick because I agree with these remarks. I think I remember that speech, and it was very, very true at that time already, and still very true today. It just lead me to say what we've been saying for years, especially at AJC, just to raise awareness about the fact that what we're seeing when it comes to the rise of anti-Semitism that has started in Europe a long time ago, and in France, you know, that it started 25 years ago at the beginning of the years 2000, we started to see this new rise in anti-Semitism, that it's not only a threat to Jewish communities, but it's often a symptom of a bigger democratic crisis. And what you're describing, both aspects, the crisis on integration, identity, multiculturalism, and this other topic of disinformation, those are threats to our democracies that are fueling anti-Semitism. And that's why we're saying that we need a whole of society approach, because at the end of the day, if we really want to have a long-term impact on hatred against Jews, we need to fix our democracies. We need to fight against those phenomena that are threatening all of us. And of course, it always starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. So what he was describing at the time, I remember when I studied with AJC 8 years ago, we organized a conference in Paris called Immigration, Integration, and Identity. Mm-hmm. So it was a broader theme than anti-Semitism, because we know, especially in a country like France, but I think it's also relevant to other European countries, that what we missed here has had a tremendous impact on Jewish communities and on the hatred that has been rising among specific communities in France and elsewhere. So I couldn't agree more, and couldn't encourage us more to focus on those bigger threats that ultimately will help us all healing our societies.
Right. Thank you so much. Emma.
Thank you for your question. I think that Rabbi Sacks is always a great reference. And this text that you were quoting is basically referencing the distinction between integration versus assimilation, which is historically a very important question for European Jews. European Jews were facing anti-Semitism for centuries, if not millennia. And at several points in history, they thought that maybe assimilation or perhaps integration would help them face anti-Semitism, or that it would help them not to be the target anymore. We've seen that in the interwar period when European nationalisms were rising and many Jewish people in European countries were marrying into they were marrying non-Jewish partners. They were becoming increasingly non-religious. However, that hasn't saved them from the ideology of Nazism. Then, after the Second World War and the tragedies of the Holocaust ended, we have had the communist era in half of Europe. And many people, again, they tried to change their names, they tried to intermarry, they tried to erase their Jewish heritage, they tried to assimilate as much as possible to save themselves, but that didn't help. And then, even in the current times, we see the same phenomenon appearing again and again. People trying to erase their Jewish identity in order to save themselves or to save themselves from the discrimination that comes with anti-Semitism. But we see that it doesn't work. It's not the clue how to heal anti-Semitism, how to fix it. So I feel like the Jewish communities in Europe are increasingly more aware of this, that anti-Semitism is a long-standing European pathology that repeats itself, and we cannot help it or avoid it by erasing our Jewish identity. And that's actually very interesting because we have had in our communities a lot of people with Jewish heritage who weren't religious. They were very assimilated. But after October 7th, they became more active. They got more involved in their Jewish identities. We call them October 8th Jews. And they came to their Jewish communities, and now they are very proud Jews because they recognize that by assimilating, they are not gonna save themselves.
Very good. Thank you, Ernest.
Thank you very much for that question. I would maybe start by saying that, first of all, Jews have been an integral part of Europe for a very long time. They're part of the European society, but so was anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has been around for thousands of years here, for at least 2 millennia, if not longer. And what we can say that as Jews, when anti-Semitism is pushed to the margins of society, life is usually in Europe, life is good. Once it starts entering historically into the mainstream, that means that trouble is on its way, and then it's not only trouble for the Jews. And the question is, why is that? It's because anti-Semitism is not the end goal. It's not never the means to an end. It's actually a tool of extremists, whether they're far right, far left, radical religious groups. It's their tool to dismantle free and democratic Europe, which actually generations bled for at least 200 years in order to achieve it. Now we live in time when generations were born into freedom and democracy, and sometimes we take this freedom and democracy for granted and forget that it's not taken for that it shouldn't be taken for granted, that it can be also lost. Humanity doesn't always goes upwards. It doesn't always progresses. Sometimes it goes down the hill. And a democracy and freedom needs to be also protected. And this is where I feel sometimes maybe in Europe is very well structured to live in freedom of democracy. Now, what is a test is protecting that freedom and democracy, because it is being attacked by extremist groups from various angles who want to dismantle it and change it with various different ideas of unfortunately always dictatorships. So I feel that this is what is at stake here. And when Rabbi Sachs, of his blessed memory, was talking about this, I had a feeling that he also had some forward looking, and he could, I don't want to say could see in the future, but he could see trouble that could come our way, and he was so much right, unfortunately. Thank you.
Mhm. Sure. Thank you so much. Commissioner Rachel Lasser.
Thank you, Chair Hartzler. I have so many questions and we have so little time. So I actually might throw some extras out there, encourage witnesses to write in, with answers if they want to. But I'll just start with those of you who've worked directly with the governments of various countries. I mean, what you've done is set out sort of our list of ideals of what policies could help fix or make the situation better. What I'm interested in, just from a very practical standpoint, are the conversations that you've actually had with with governments, like in Europe, in Colombia, and where you think there is the most ripeness for receiving a policy or a policy push from the US government, if that makes sense. So I think that's the main question that I'd love anyone to volunteer and answer. The other questions, just so you know, popping in my head, and you can write in later. I mean, Emma, it would be so great to hear also where you feel there's hope in a new generation of Jews. I mean, I think that would just make us all feel really good, and I'd love to hear about that. I would have loved to hear about Elliot, about how Iranian Jews are helping other Iranians in this moment. That would have been wonderful to hear. So I don't know if we'll have time. So I'll just stop there because we have so few minutes.
Yeah, great questions, Rachel, and we can go a little bit longer. So I
Okay.
hope we can hear from everyone. Marcus.
Rachel, thanks for your question. At this point, we're living day by day with this government. This government is going to end his tenure in August of this year, and we don't know who is going to follow. It's a government with a similar views, but we have experienced something which is really very hard for us. We have no dialogue with the government. The government is really very anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-everything, and the dialogue we have with the national police, but we not with the government. So, how I answer your question. As I said before, the U.S. government, because the U.S. and Colombia relation is very close. President Petro was at the White House just a month ago, and he was called there. He was not invited. He was subpoenaed. And I think that after that, he lowered a little bit the rhetoric, even with regard to Israel. But we need the U.S. government, the U.S. Congress, the State Department to really put pressure on the Colombian government to lower the anti-Semitic rhetoric. The public media, which here is not neutral, is very, very anti-Israel. The public media promotes anti-Semitism. They have, for example, one of the most anti-Semitic Spanish commentators, Pablo Iglesias from Podemos in Spain, having a program of 1 hour in which he blasts Israel and the Jews a whole hour. So that's what we want. The U.S. government and the U.S. institution to put pressure on Colombia to really lower this anti-Semitic and anti-Israel rhetoric. Thanks, Rachel.
Yes, and Sophie.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I will go straight to the point on where is the best place, to put pressure. Of course, at AJC, we are in close touch with European governments. I myself recommend very, very regularly to the French government on the next national strategy against antisemitism. And I can say that there's a great determination to do good. And those strategies are usually filled with public policies that are going in the right direction. But to our opinion, what is missing is the awareness of what we just described before, that fighting against antisemitism is not only fighting against this specific hatred targeting Jews, but that the policies must also be connected to other policies that are addressing the democratic crisis, and that on the long term, the fight against anti-Semitism, when it comes to public action, must match the pace of the phenomenon and must be connected to other areas of public policies that are addressing our democratic crisis. So what the government is doing when it comes to fighting against conspiracy theories and disinformation, what we are doing to counter radicalization, Islamism, extremist polarization. What we see is a very divided way the governments are targeting those issues, whereas we believe they are all interconnected. So there must be like greater awareness of what the fight against anti-Semitism implies. And because we are a very centralized functioning country, as you know, I would say that where we have the most impact sometimes to get like a tough decision or a stronger decision being made is to go directly to our president, to go directly to the executive branch in France. And it usually works, like the big decision on anti-Semitism, like the adoption of the working definition of IRA came directly from the president. Now, of course, we also have a very strong parliament, and recently we had a new legislation we supported on combating anti-Semitism in higher education. We will have one that will be debated next month on banning calls for the destruction of a state, which would be a direct implementation of the IRA working definition that we also supported. So I think also more cooperation or support to French parliamentarians, European parliamentarians that are trying to move the needle and move forward new legislation could also, of course, be helpful. And this is what we're trying to also do at our civil society level by creating this network that we have of transatlantic friends of Israel. It's more like on the diplomatic type of issues that we cover, but where we gather European parliamentarians with US members of Congress. But I will stop here.
Thank you. Elliot, did you want to address what the Iranians are doing to help each other?
Yes, if I may, and I'll keep it short, and I'm happy to send in more information in writing because I know time is short. But even though the Iranian Jewish community is probably the smallest or one of the smallest of the religious minorities in Iran, throughout the time since the revolution and up to present day, the Jewish community, the Iranian Jewish community, organized Iranian Jewish community in the United States has been advocating on behalf of all religious minorities. That started with when President Carter issued an executive order banning Iranians from entering the United States after the hostage crisis at the beginning of the revolution, where we advocated to overturn that executive order successfully to allow other religious minorities as well as Jews to come through. And it went through during our advocacy for the Lautenberg Amendment and then the Specter Amendment, which again brought in a presumption of persecution for all religious minorities. And we have been doing that all throughout. We have a very, very, we have to be very careful, and we have to constantly do a balancing act, because whatever we say or do here on behalf of the Jewish community will impact and affect the remaining community inside Iran. And so we have a balancing act that we have to be very careful about what we can do publicly and privately, but we have always tried our best to advocate for and help other religious minorities in the country.
Very good. Thank you. Emma.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the question. Where is the hope for the new generation of Jews in Europe or perhaps even globally? I think that the hope for Jewish future in Europe is not an abstract idea. It is very visible daily in the new generation of Jews who choose to live their Jewish lives openly and proudly and actively, despite all the challenges around them, around us. I've already mentioned October 8th Jews. There are so many people who were detached from their Jewish heritage and identity, but now since October 7th, they embrace their Jewish identity and they became more involved in Jewish communal life. There are so many young Jews that are loud and proud about their Jewish identity. Young Jews have initiative, agency, and motivation to foster Jewish life, to lead communities, and to combat anti-Semitism. We have seen that on university campuses since October 7th. It was the Jewish students who were in the front of the fight against anti-Semitism, both at university campuses but online. I think that hope is in the young people who build their Jewish identities and communities instead of leaving them, in students who organize Shabbat dinners on campuses where anti-Semitism does exist, but they do it despite that, and in young leaders who refuse to let Jewish life become something that only belongs to museums or history books. And I do think that today being Jewish in Europe often requires courage, but we as the new and current generation have something that I think our predecessors, our parents and grandparents didn't have. And that is not only the strong sense of Jewish identity, but also global connection. Like young Jews in Prague, Paris, Berlin, we are not isolated. We are connected to each other, to Israel, and to other Jewish communities around the world. And I think that hope is also something that Jewish communities are supposed to foster. It is one of the essential Jewish values, or at least to me, and we are trying to foster it. And we as European Jews, we feel like we belong to Europe, so we are doing our best to remain here in safety, in freedom, and to be comfortable here.
That's great. Good for you. There is hope. And now turn to Commissioner Mohammed El Sanusi.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Chair Hasler, and of course to our witnesses. Thank you for your dedication and commitment as well to combat anti-Semitism. And let me just agree with our witnesses that anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish issue, but a problem that impacts us all, and that we each have a role to play in countering it in an inclusive manner. I just want to agree with everyone with that. But also I want to also state obviously that our mandate as a commission, of course, to raise the awareness about this rising anti-Semitism issues in Europe and around the world. And these hearings and other effort that attempting to gather the best recommendation that can combat anti-Semitism in order to advance religious freedom or belief for everyone. I just want to, I know that the time is very limited here, but I do have a couple of questions. One that I really believe that the collaboration that mentioned by some of you also is so critical. So my question is that I remember during the Biden administration, Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt, efforts in creating an alliance of countries that can collaborate to and coordinate to address anti-Semitism with the understanding that there are different contexts and all of that. But I don't know, what is the status of that now? Is it we're building on it to combat the rising anti-Semitism, or what we're doing there? I think maybe that, maybe my good friend David can answer that, or Ernest here to answer that as well. The second question, I want to, just mention it as well. And that is, again, with the acknowledgement that, our mandate is international, but sometimes, we share our domestic experience, meaning that our American experience, with the world, and we have seen communities actually inspired by those experience. Just to mention that with my good friend again, Ambassador Saperstein here, when he was directing the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, and my friend Rachel was there as well. We created this kind of grassroots effort to bring the understanding between the American Jews and the Muslim communities together, and we created resources like Children of Abraham, as well as with the conservative Jews movement. We created Sharing the Wealth. So all of these efforts really is critical to build that grassroots, assets to combat, anti-Semitism. And this has also reminded me, our, giant late Rabbi Sachs' efforts in advancing religious freedom. I remember, as a giant, advocate for religious freedom, he met with Doug Coe, also late Doug Coe, also giant advocate for religious freedom as well, and Sheikh bin Bayah, also giant advocate, the Muslim, evangelical, and a Jew met together to find what would be the best way to collaborate, right, in advancing religious freedom for everyone. Rabbi Sachs completely believe in that, and I'm glad that it's mentioned here, to join hand actually to address anti-Semitism and all form of discrimination. So that collective effort, if we are missing that, then I think we anticipate the complexity of all of these problems. So I wanna just Ernest and others just answer, or maybe you can send them in writing, but the time is very short. Thank you so much, Chair Hasler.
Sure. Did Ambassador Saperstein want to
Sure.
start?
Again, this administration deserves credit, Mohammed, for having continued to build on the international guidelines, the global guidelines that they have. And now 47 countries have done that. And there is a lot of the guidelines were based on the assumption that in an interconnected world in which hate knows no boundaries, transnational cooperation can identify threats, raise awareness, broaden the use of best practices, and more effectively and proactively coordinate responses. And there are not a number of instrumentalities, the OSCE, the Council of Europe, here, the Organization of American States, that have special envoys. Rabbi Andy Baker has done that for a long time with the OSCE. There is a lot of international cooperation that is aimed at addressing this, recognizing, again, no country can do it alone. Here, no religion can do it alone. We're all in this. We're all in this together. So I think what you are hoping for really does exist, and that is another reason to be optimistic about confronting the enormity of the challenges that we face.
Very good. Did anybody else want to weigh in on that? Ernest?
Yes, maybe I would address the second part of the question with regards to cooperation and collaboration. And thank you very much for the question. I would just quote our president of the World Jewish Congress, who said, "The best way to fight Muslim hate is when Christians and Jews do it. And the best way to fight anti-Semitism is when Christians and Muslims do it, and so on, when the best way to fight anti-Christian beliefs is when Muslims and Jews come together to do it." Victims should not be fighting the hate against them alone, and they cannot win in this fight. So collaboration and coming together is of utmost importance when it comes to fighting any type of hate, any type of especially religious hate. And I think this is where we have a gap and where we can improve. All religious groups, when attacked, somehow turn towards the inside. I guess this is maybe human nature to protect oneself, but we forget that we have allies. We all have allies, and unfortunately, it seems that evil people come easier together to fight a good people than good people coming together to protect themselves. And this is something where I think it's very important to expand and to build on, because only, as you said, only by joining forces together we can beat these extremist groups that are spreading hate in order to achieve whatever their goals are. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcus, briefly.
I'm going to be very brief, telling something that we probably all know. We work a lot of interreligious dialogue, but the elephant in the room with regard to Muslims is always there. So we have experienced difficulties in having activities that they used to have together with Muslim communities after October 7th. For example, we used to host iftar dinner. We're not doing any longer. We do a interreligious seder. We don't have Muslims there. So this, to put it, I haven't found the formula to break that wall that appears now in the dialogue and in the interconnection between Jews and Muslims. Thank you.
Thank you. And Anne-Sophie, you get the last word.
Yes, very briefly on the question about international cooperation, because this is something very important for us at AJC that we've been encouraging a lot since antisemitism has become that global issue, and that we witness it everywhere. And everywhere when we make those recommendations to governments and we realize that the experience of Jews are sometimes similar, we really believe in sharing best practices. And I mentioned at the end of my remarks that we organized this French-American forum last year on anti-Semitism. And why we did that? We did that because exactly the US administration a year before had initiated this bilateral dialogue, this first bilateral dialogue between France and the United States on anti-Semitism, using the assumption, like the idea, because we have the two biggest Jewish communities in the world after Israel, sharing a lot with different approaches, but we really saw the value of sharing those best practices. And we even got from the US government a Fulbright specialist program for AJC. We have a president of an American university that came to France to learn about the French context in higher education and to come up with shared with best practices coming from both sides of the Atlantic. So we really think that there's a lot of value, and we are hopeful that it's going to be only reinforced in the future.
Chair Hartzler, if you 10 seconds, please. I'd be derelict if I didn't recognize Mohammed El-Senussi, who is one of the great coalition builders of our time and has really been a champion of the work that this hearing is about. So I just wanted to say that.
Very, very good. Thank you for doing that.
Agreed. Okay. Yeah.
So unfortunately, we've come to the conclusion of our hearing, but I really appreciate and want to thank all of our witnesses for their powerful testimonies highlighting the religious freedom violations that Jews unfortunately are facing around the world, as well as helping to provide some concrete recommendations for what we can do in our country as well as other countries and individually to help address this situation. So we want to also thank everyone who attended either in person and via live stream with us today. You can find the recording of this hearing as well as witness testimonies on our website, which is www.uscirf.gov. This hearing is now adjourned.